I had my children on the floor. I was on my favourite blanket that my grandmother gave me on the floor like a cat.
And I realised in that moment the potential of what our bodies can really do as women.
Like I could feel his head, I could do my own internal, like, yeah, his head, I could feel it.
I was in tears, I was just in tears and overwhelmed with gratitude.
Hi and welcome to the Natural Birth Podcast, the podcast that is bringing embodied birth wisdom from women from all over the world sharing their natural birth stories. Don't forget to subscribe and download so that you can always have access to these empowering and positive natural birth stories. Hi, my name is Anna and I am the Natural Birth Podcast host. I'm a former midwife who left the system and I'm now the proud founder of Sacred Birth International, a woman-owned company with a mission to revolutionize the birth world and bring focus to the sacred and the natural intelligence of the birth process. We do this by providing world-class education, courses, programs, and coaching to equip women with the knowledge and the tools to have conscious pregnancies, empowering and positive birth experiences, and the most nourishing start possible for themselves and their babies postpartum. We also educate and mentor aspiring birth workers into sacred space holders and physiological birth advocates in the Sacred Birth Worker Mentorship, the Beyond a Doula training. If you'd like to work with me or take any of our courses, programs, or the mentorship, then head on over to sacredbirthinternational.com to find out more. Hi, and welcome to this very special episode of the Natural Birth Podcast. Today, we are going to dive on into how to know if birth work is your soul calling, if it's for you. You know, I get this question a lot, like, how do you know if, becoming a doula or becoming a midwife or becoming a sacred birth worker, being a birth worker, like if that is for you, how do you know if it's your purpose or your calling? And I thought that the best thing to do was to gather with some other epic birth workers and ask them. So I've invited a midwife, a pediatrician, a doula, and a maiden who decided to become a sacred birth worker. And FYI, all of them are sacred birth workers. They're all in my beautiful mentorship community. So we've gathered here today, and I'm going to ask these ladies the questions that you're all wondering. How do you know if birth work is your soul calling? So with no further ado, I'm going to invite Marie, Jess, Sophie, and Sophia to join this conversation. And we're going to start by just briefly sharing how you came into birth work, the first kind of time that you were seeking it out. Like, how did you arrive there to become a sacred birth worker or a doula or a doctor or a midwife in the birth realm? And I would love to hear from Marie first. Marie, you are a beautiful sacred birth worker in Germany, based in Berlin, and you came straight to the Sacred Birth Worker Mentorship as a birth nerd. Do you want to tell us about that? What made you do that? What brought you to this line of work?
Yes, thank you, Anna. Thank you for having us on also. I'm so excited to be here in a cesarean section. And that was kind of what I knew about birth always. And I thought always that birth is very dangerous and dramatic. And yeah, I also didn't really question that a lot. And then I saw a birth story on Instagram, like an influencer shared her birth story. And she shared that when labor started, she went into her bedroom and kind of turned off the lights, and she was alone in there and retreated. And I thought, why would she do that? Why is she not calling the doctor and the ambulance? And why is she not calling people? Why is she alone? And that was the moment when I thought, this is so interesting. I want to hear more about it. Like I didn't know anything, but I immediately knew this is profound somehow. This is different from what I know. And so from that day on, I started listening to birth stories day and night. Like every time I was free, I was just listening to birth stories. And thanks to Spotify, I was only shown natural birth stories. I think I was very lucky in that, because I was seeing all the positive birth, natural birth, empowering, like these kind of things. And that's what I started exploring. And that was at a time when I was reconnecting to my body a lot and trying to learn to trust my body again. And somehow birth helped me a lot in that. Like what I learned about birth helped me to learn to trust my body again. And I was very immersed in yoga at that time too. And it almost felt like birth was a spiritual teacher for me. Like she just came in and she was like, okay, here's a few things you can learn about life in general. And yeah, that's what it felt like for me. And I think from that moment on, there was no going back. You know how you say, like, what you know once, you can't forget. Like that was it. And yeah, I was just so interested and so fascinated by birth, but didn't think, like back then, I didn't think I would start working in birth. I just thought it was so beautiful and yeah, just a lot to learn from. And it gave me a lot of peace and a lot of confidence back, I think. Yeah.
Beautiful. So how did you know it was for you? Like when you decided to actually apply to do this mentorship, like how did you know? Because you weren't certain from the get-go, were you?
Well, a friend of mine said at some point that I should become a doula because I only talk about birth. So I started looking into programs, and I couldn't find anything that I liked. Like most of the things were just weekend courses and just, yeah, not satisfying, especially for me because I've never given birth and never been to a birth. So I thought, oh, one weekend, how am I supposed to learn anything there? And I reached out to other people and asking for advice, but nothing really resonated with me. And a few days later, you, Anna, you announced the mentorship that back then had a different name. I think the Spiritual Midwife Mentorship Program. Yeah. So you announced it for the first time, and it was a few days after I had started looking and kind of thinking, this is not what I was expecting to be out there. So I don't know. Then it was like, okay, somehow this is very aligned right now. And then you made me go on the call with you and you know, get to know each other. And I did take some time for my decision, just because I am and I was on that path of trusting my body again. So I wanted it to be a response from my body. And I think I took a month to get back to you. Yeah. And I don't know, it felt like such a big decision for me. It felt like a really big step. And the answer came, and it was yes. And I trusted that completely. Yeah.
I love that. And I mean, that's something that I very much push for with, people who apply to go like, is it a full body yes? I want it to be a
Mm.
full body yes. And if it's not right now.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, Marie.
Thank you.
Now, I'd love to hear from Jess. You are a mama and you were already a doula before you applied for the Sacred Birth Worker Mentorship. So I'd love to hear from you. And you're also based in Atlanta, Georgia, USA, for anyone who's in that area listening to this and want to connect. I would love to hear from you how you were pulled first and foremost to becoming a doula. What brought you to birth work and why become a doula?
Mm, Taking a moment. It was really nice getting captivated by Marie's story. Um, I became a mom when my husband was active duty in the military, and out there was this. I mean, it felt like we were a bunch of kids together, and we were all like band together, always supporting one another. And I just found family out there. And being in California, that's a really far place from Georgia. So all of my, I guess, support team, family of origin, life prior was in Georgia. So I was figuring out just like the walk from maidenhood to motherhood in this environment, basically alone. And and that was the story for a lot of the people I met out in Cali. A lot of the young women I met out in Cali, like my husband's um, a Marine. He's active duty. He's constantly with other Marines, and there's this leadership role that you kind of find yourself in when you're in that lifestyle. And I was just always supporting. I was Mrs. Bell. Mrs. Bell is cooking for them. Mrs. Bell is baking for them, baking for some of my husband's other coworkers. And when I became a mom, it was in alignment with a lot of other women in the area because we're all young, we're all out in California. It was like, I don't know, it was the culture. And out there, I was supporting one of my husband's coworkers. And she was like, Jez, you should become a doula. And I had never heard of it. I'm like, oh, what do you mean? And she was like, you're just so supportive and you've been helping me. And during that time, we had been having conversations about breastfeeding. And it was just so taboo where she came from. Like, it wasn't something she was used to. And I'm just talking about it because it's like, well, I mean, to me, I feel like when I go in this path of life, I learn something and it's like, okay, I'm going to take that with me. And I've just been like this, finding my own way. And when I was out there, I was educating and I was like, oh, I like that. And that's kind of the basis of it. I journeyed alone and I realized I didn't want the women around me to also experience it in that way. Um, and that's like the start.
Beautiful. And that brought you to seek out a doula course. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. Now, I'd love to hear from Sophia. Sophia, you are a midwife and you're originally from the UK, but you live in Greece on Corfu. And you've also been on this podcast before sharing your beautiful natural birth stories. You're a mama and a midwife. And I'd love to hear, how did you come about becoming a midwife? What brought you to birth work? How did you know that being a midwife was for you?
It's funny because when I first started to ask me that question, when I first chose to become a midwife, and people started to ask me that question, I would always say, oh, it's something that came to me later in life. And it was a decision that came to me later in life. It wasn't, the first thing I chose to study or the first thing that came to me. But looking back and having done the mentorship now and doing so much work, looking back at the threads that run through my life, I realize that actually it has been several threads that have been running through my life that culminated in me choosing to become a midwife. That seems to be the best place and use of all of those threads that were running through my life. And they were like a fascination with biology, physiology, the natural world and how it worked, and particularly women's health, women's body, pregnancy, birth, and also the innate connection and wisdom. And it sounds so cliche and trite when I put it like that, but I mean, like, really, when you live and are in touch with what we are, we are a part of the natural world. And when you are constantly being curious about that and constantly investigating that, it just becomes more and more natural and more magical. Like, it becomes to make your decisions of your life around that. So I had those threads running from childhood and into teenagehood, and as a young woman. And I think there's also a part of me that always wanted to make like big social impact, and I was never quite sure where and how I fitted in that and how I could use that passion. And I was doing my first studies was in acting, and when I was putting on a production of the Vagina Monologues, which I think a lot of people know, and it's an all female cast and it's talking about all female topics. And I think through that production and through the process of making that play, I suddenly realized that all of these threads that had been running through my life tied into a knot to become the best place that I could use the skills I had, the curiosity I had, the knowledge I had, the best place for me in society to make that social change was as a midwife. The start of life, the start of so many decisions, the start of so many awakenings and deepenings and awareness and expansion. That's the best place for all of those threads to support. So it wasn't until I was about in my late 20s that I decided to become a midwife. And I think probably also I was thinking about having a family, and I really wanted to close that gap between my maiden self and my mother self, and subconsciously realized that there was this huge gap between the world of birthing and motherhood and the world of maidenhood that, for whatever reason, in this society isn't bridged. And I wanted to bridge that within myself, and then also bridge that in other women as best as I could. Yeah. That's
Beautiful.
what brought me.
Thank you so much for that, Sophia. And I recognize that. I mean, that's been a few of the mentees have come with that desire of maybe themselves wanting to become pregnant or being pregnant and starting Sacred Birth Worker Mentorship. And I also recognize that in when I became a midwife, that that a lot of women are also drawn just to deepen actually the knowledge of themselves as a feminine creature, and really reclaiming this knowledge that just is not accessible to us at all, really, in society. I mean, it's crazy that it's not, but it's truly not. So I recognize that. Thank you for sharing that, Sophia. And finally, Sophie, our pediatrician. So you are based currently in Germany, but you are relocating to the UK this year, and you are stepping into something totally new as you do so. But I would love to hear what brought you to becoming a pediatrician and working in the NICU with little babies and attending births as a doctor in the hospital system.
Well, hello everyone. I guess what brought me to being a doctor first was, when you're 18-year-old and you want to save the world, in what ways can you save the world? And I wanted to do humanitarian work, and I thought, oh, someday I want to be with Doctors Without Borders, and I want to help people in war zones. That was the original idea. But then my journey into birth work ironically started in medical school. And when I began learning about how pregnancy and fetal development works, I was just so fascinated. Like when I learned about how the placenta forms, I was just in awe. And I thought to myself, this is some sort of magic happening. And because so much of it is still kind of in the dark and not totally clear. And, I learned in medical school, I learned all about how birth is perfectly orchestrated and how interventions interfere with the natural, perfect design and should be kept at an absolute minimum, and how no place should have a C-section rate over 10 to 15%. And I kind of fell in love with pregnancy and the fetus and birth in that obstetric module that I had in medical school quite early on. And, and then as soon as I had an opportunity, I went into the delivery room, and then I kind of saw the reality. I lasted 3 days before I could no longer take it or like justify it with my conscience to even be present. And I was supposed to be there for 2 weeks, and I just changed into the operating, like the gynecological, urological operating room, to be just as far away from birth as possible. And I decided, you know what, I don't think that's for me. So I went into pediatrics instead, and discovered, because I still wanted to be close to, I was like, oh, well, I can take care of the fetus outside and still be involved with it, I suppose. So yeah, I went into pediatrics and discovered I'm, good at it. And I was on track to eventually become, a neonatologist. So to specialize in newborn intensive care. And in a way, stay in the birth world, but being able to say to myself that I'm not participating in the sabotage or violation of women, which was the real issue I had. Um, but while I did that and went through medical school, I was still on the hunt for the truth. Because I sensed when those 3 days I was in the delivery room, like, I mean, that was just so an incongruity with what they were teaching. Like, how does what we learn have nothing to do with what is reality, and how is all of what they do like against the evidence we are taught, and like how is it then that they just say like, because that's the funny thing, and the kind of doctor you become is just the kind of doctor you're trained to be. So yes, you learn about all the facts and the evidence and the stuff, the theoretical stuff in medical school, but you're then trained by whoever trains you, and really much of what you do is eminence based in a sense of it gets passed down to you, and then is a result of your own experience as well. So, your own fears and traumas as a doctor, I suppose. So yeah, but I was on the hunt for the truth, and I started kind of digging in my free time, and listening to all sort of stuff and reading into all sort of stuff, and I was on this quest for years, and I slowly grew to realize that I would actually choose a free birth for myself if I ever were to give birth. And obviously, then who I was slowly becoming on the inside was increasingly in incongruity with who I was on the outside. And it kind of also became increasingly difficult to witness sabotage birth and obstetric violence. And it was just kind of starting to not be enough anymore to just turn away from the scene and like kind of tell myself, oh, I'm not participating in it. And, they kind of turned away at the like gruesome stuff and just looking at, my NICU being like, oh my God, um, just waiting, praying for the baby would come out of it all right. And then as I was kind of in this weird place, something amazing actually happened on 2 occasions when I was doing a shift for the pediatric emergency room. Twice, a couple with about like a 6-week-old baby came in at like 1 or 2 in the morning. Just that it started to become quiet and actually had like some time to give them. Because normally in the emergency room, of like, 5 to 10 minutes per patient, you just want to move them through quickly because there's just so many people. And yeah, I just somehow it was empty and I had time for these people. And they were falling apart at the seams with like difficult breastfeeding journeys, and baby that wouldn't stop crying. And after I showed them that nothing was indeed wrong with their baby, I naturally got to kind of hold space for these women and witness how that and just a bit of practical tips can completely shift the situation. And as I watched like a woman reconnect with her intuition and knowing that she's capable, and like the tears start flowing and the breast start leaking and the baby is put back on the breast, I realized that's the kind of medicine work I truly want to give to the world. And that had been the most beautiful moment of my career. It was none of like the, crazy resuscitating newborn stuff. And then 6 months ago, I got contacted by a friend that I had in medical school, I kind of lost contact with. And she too had become a mother, and everything was falling apart around the 5 or 6 week mark point. And and she knew I was a pediatrician, and as always, it's kind of, oh, they come to you, but like, oh, I think something's wrong with my baby, when really it's like something's wrong here, and I need help. I just don't know how to voice that. And it was my day off, and so I traveled to her because I could sense there was nothing actually wrong with her baby, and I got to sit at her feet and then kind of be her postpartum doula. And I left that day knowing that this was my true calling, and within that week, I signed up for the mentorship.
Oh, I love that. There was so much recognition in what you were saying, and I'm sure Sophia was nodding as well, being a midwife in the system. Um, how it's so true what you said about what we learn, both as doctors and midwives in uni or whatever, is not at all what you meet in the hospital system, especially, right? But just within the system, and that absolute disconnect, and so true that you become who trains you, or like in the environment you get trained. So I love that you gave that kind of feedback for anyone listening who's thinking, oh, should I be an obstetrician? Um, I don't know. I think you would say, maybe not. No, joking. Maybe you said yes. But it's good. It's good for anyone listening about, all the different professions that you can work as within the birth world, right? And everyone has a place, right? But I guess if you want to support physiological birth, then being an obstetrician is not the calling potentially to go through that training. So I would love now to hear from Jess. I'd love to hear what your answer is to, is birth work a soul calling?
Mm, is birth a soul calling? I would like say 100% yes. Um, I felt a lot of recognition when Marie was saying that she found birth to be a teacher, like a spiritual teacher. And I'm still learning so much about life and being in my feminine body temple and being a woman, and birth work. I came into it on like a whim. Like I came into it, dive feet first into it to learn. I didn't come in with any like knowledge, or I wasn't looking for it. It found me. And the more I've been a part of more conversations, a part of more books, like reading it, the more I've found out about myself, or I've learned about myself, or I've been healing within myself. And it just is. Whew, a big
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Jess. Sophia, is birth work a soul calling?
Yes, yes. I mean, in for me, absolutely 100% yes. I don't think um, I don't think there's anything else I could possibly be other than a midwife. And and I think maybe maybe one of the things that everybody needs to do in their life is find their key, the key that gives you those lessons, as Marie and Jez so eloquently put it, those teachers. And that's not always people, that's things that you do or things you explore and things you learn or places you go. And it's not the same for everybody. For some people it's carpentry or hairdressing or I don't know, many other painting or music. For me it's birth work. For me it's birth work, and I see life through the lens of birth work. And whether that's life, whether that's my cooking or taking care of my children, or whether that's death, or whether that's friendship, everything I do and see and think is through the lens of birth work. And it for me it's my micro level, like I can look down on the micro level of birth, and that micro level teaches me about the macro level. That is, the rest of the world, the universe. So yeah, it is absolutely a soul calling for me.
I love that so much, and I resonate so much with that answer too. It is it really does teach you about absolutely everything. I love that answer. Thank you, Cynthia. And Marie, is birth work is so calling for you?
Such a good question. And I almost feel like someone should say no. I would say yes. Because, like Jazz and Sophia already said, it was like, it's quite surprising to me that I'm sitting here with you as a sacred birth worker. Like, that was nowhere. As a child, I had all these dreams and I wanted to work with animals and be a journalist and all these things, many things. I had so many dreams, but not to work in birth. I actually knew someone who wanted to become a midwife, and I always thought, why would you become a midwife? Like, why? So it found me, and I've learned so much. And I feel like even during the mentorship, I wasn't sure if I would be able to work in birth. And I think I told you a few times, Anna, in our one-on-ones, and just because I had never been to a birth, and I thought, how would this be possible? Me at a birth supporting someone, and then being on call and all of these things. And then I went to the first birth, and it felt so natural. It felt like, yeah, that is just what we do now. And even the couple, because of course they knew it was my first birth, so afterwards they were like, so this was your first birth, yeah? And I said, yeah, but it feels natural to me, and it feels like something I have done before, just not in this lifetime. And so if that is, what then we would say is a soul calling, yeah, I would say yes.
I love that. And I think that resonates with a lot of people in this line of work, that it's that feeling that we've done this before. We recognize this, we remember this. And I remember you sharing after being at your first birth, because I talk a lot about space holding, right? And that, as you practice becoming the channel between the heavens and the earth, when you are in the birth space and you can quiet your mind, you can really tune your nervous system, and you feel through your heart and the womb, you just know what to do. And I loved when you came back to me and went like, I get it now. I didn't understand what you were talking about, but now I get it. And I will always remember you saying that. It just warmed my heart. And it's the thing, like, you don't know until you're there. You don't really get it. But when you're there, you get it and you understand the training we've gone through to make you into that space holder for that rite of passage, for that space.
Yeah, it's true. Just everyone know it's true.
Love that so much. Thanks, Marie. And Sophie, is birth work a soul calling? What do you say?
I would say yes. I didn't realize I guess it was not a calling in the sense of like I heard it and I went there. It was just I somehow did it and then I realized, oh my God, this is the thing. Like this is the thing I'm meant to be doing. And I truly believe that the way we experience postpartum will shape how we move through motherhood and will shape the relationship we have with our children and the way they grow up and then inevitably the way they will act in the world. So I truly think that birth and postpartum can change the world and it all starts with sovereign, intuitive and instinctual birth. Um, and I just feel the true calling to reconnect women with their sovereignty and their inner wisdom and their intuition. And I want to see women truly experience joy and fulfillment and power in mothering, because also that's what I hope for myself. And now I can see how everything has been kind of in divine timing and in divine design to equip me with the skills to actually do so. Even down to me randomly ending up at, luckily ending up training at one of the only UNICEF certified baby friendly NICUs in the country, like, and the one that is leading the way in that. And they actually did not train in like, training kind of a quite alternative universe without like knowing it beforehand. And that is, I think set me up as well to be more receptive to the truth. So it's just all been in divine design and um yeah, I think it's just uh in a sense, I believe in fate, but I also believe we're only fated to do the things we choose. So it's kind of yeah, it comes from within for sure.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that, Sophie. Now, Sophia, I would love to hear from you. You are a midwife and you've been a home birth midwife for quite some time. Why did you feel drawn to take the Sacred Birth Worker Mentorship?
Um, Again, I think it's one of those things that when I look back, the reasons that I chose it are probably different to the reasons that I actually did it, you know? Even when I was training to be a midwife, I thought, oh, everybody should have trained to be a doula first before they train to be a midwife. And then everybody who goes on to obstetrics should have trained to be a midwife first. Like, those are the logical steps. You shouldn't just go diving straight into the pathological before you know what physiology is. Of course, that's part of the bridge between being a maiden and moving into a mother. We should have already seen it from our sisters, from our mothers, from our cousins, from our friends. We should have been a part of the birth world from children, as opposed to suddenly coming into it when you're pregnant or even halfway through your pregnancy and going, oh my God, I don't know what to do. So it was always at the back of my mind to do some kind of doula training. But then obviously I qualified and I was working and then I moved and then I'm an independent midwife. So the opportunity never arrived, and then every training I heard of was always like a weekend, or seemed quite impersonal or not enough, not deep enough, and so nothing really resonated. That I was like, yeah, that's where I want to find out this bridge, where I want to jump, where I want to dive, where I want to learn about myself as well as birth work. What is it that I've gone through in this life and in previous lives that brings me to birth work? And then I heard that I heard your podcast and I heard you advertising the mentorship, and I was like, oh yeah, I think that is something that I'd really like to do. And I think also it's when I looked into becoming a midwife, the first thing I started to look for was apprenticeship models, because that's the way we should train. That's the way, the village midwife, the person who cares for this community should train with a village midwife and know the community, know the village, know the local herbs, the local ways, the local culture that cares for cares for women during that process. But of course, in Europe, you can't do that. It just doesn't exist. Maybe it's starting to come back, but it's certainly not widely available. And so part of me always hungered for that. And I think, like Marie was saying, like it's something ancestral. Like I feel grief actually that I wasn't able to do that, because I know that that's how it should have been done. But when I heard you being the kind of midwife that I respect and would want to study under, or were the midwife, now the midwitch, and you were offering the mentorship, I thought, well, that's the next best thing to having a village midwife train me. So I think that was the reason actually why I took the mentorship in the end.
I love that so much. And you feel like such a soul sister when it comes to like, you're such a similar midwife to myself. And it's been an absolute pleasure having a fellow midwife in the mentorship. I hope there'll be plenty more choosing to come on into our little tribe. And yeah, thanks. And I'd love to hear from Sophie. What made you want to do this Sacred Birth Worker Mentorship instead of any other kind of doula training out there, or maybe free birthing training out there?
Well, I think my biggest fear going into, or like the biggest hurdle internally, was like, oh, well, how do I become that space holder, or that, like, how do you learn to be with women when you're so used to in your daily life, obviously in the medical system, I'm at the top of the hierarchy in that sense. I'm so used to being the authority and people coming to me, and it's kind of a different relationship. And I was really craving to kind of get in touch with that feminine wisdom within. And I had been on this little journey of feminine awakening for myself. But I was truly, I just when I just saw the kind of the outline of the course, I was like, oh, I feel like this is gonna really bridge that gap for me. This is really gonna bridge that gap for me so I can learn to truly be with women. And it was just an intuitive thing, you know. I did look at those other courses, and there was just not a full body yes. I just knew that there was something for me to learn here. And I think that, you know, that was the first step I really had to do, is to listen to an intuitive calling. And yeah, and I'm so happy that also maybe it felt a bit scary as well to be like, oh, well, you know, stepping straight into the radical opposite, as you know, coming from being the enemy. And yeah, I don't know, it just felt right. And when I read, I was like, yes, this is what I need to bridge that gap. And this is what it's done for me, really, to discover there was not that much to learn, but so much to embody from what is already within. And that for me was the big thing I learned. So grateful.
It's so beautiful. And I remember, from our clarity call that that was what you were seeking. Those kind of the first couple of months were really the juice that, because so much, just like Sophia, like being a midwife, obviously, but the embodiment. Yeah, I love that for you. Thank you. And Jess, I'd love to hear from you. What made you choose the Sacred Birth Worker Mentorship after doing a doula course? Wasn't that good enough? Leading question.
Leading answer with laugh. Um, I think it was enough if I was continuing with how I started. I started my doula business like, so the course was 3 weeks, not 3 weeks, 3 days, 3 days. That was my course. It was online, it was virtual. And after that, I was gonna lead with the real masculine way of doing my business. And I got all the things. It was like this doing the things without the inner work that comes with being in the birth world. Because I feel like once you actually are part of the birth world and actually in conversations within the culture itself, one thing leads to another thing, you learn about another thing. And after my birth course or my doula course, there were so many questions that I still had. And that embodiment, I didn't feel confident in embodying a sacred space holder or being with women, um, because there was just so much I didn't know. It was like a crash course. And then I realized once I threw doula work like to the side, I let it go because I went to one hospital birth and it was like I had this surface level or superficial understanding of natural birth and what that meant. And it just didn't hit. And with my life, if my soul isn't aligned, there will be all these little breadcrumbs of, well, nope, you're not doing anything anymore, not doing anymore. And it was just like, okay, the doula route just wasn't it. So when I found the Natural Birth podcast, I was just a mom hanging out in my car. While my son was still sleeping or napping, I would get like a chance to just be with myself, and I could indulge in just the stories, like the birth stories themselves were new. They were yummy. They were just like, it was just like a new world. It was a new paradigm. It was a new everything. And that in itself, like, reawakened my love for birth. And then Anna, you posted the Midwife to Midwitch episode. And it was the presence that you had with yourself and like the understanding and the reclamation of what it means to be with women. And I'm sitting here like, well, what is sacred birth? She talks about being sacred and living sacredly. And I really love the concept of bridging that gap of, because I could research everything, I can read everything, I can tune into all of this knowledge, but it was the embodiment that just your voice, I've told you this too, your superpower. Um, it was just captivating, and I was looking for the sisterhood, looking for the community, because like I said, going back to jumping into doula work with the more superficial masculine approach, the business only approach, the this is how I'm going to make my money approach that I feel like is very common. Um, I just I needed a break from all that, and I needed to be actually, there's so much to learn from being in these conversations themselves. And I think with how impulsive I choose and do things and how much knowledge I can come into, it's been nice to actually be around wise women and hear from your experience and continue to, I guess, step within the layers that is the uncovering of the feminine, the sacred feminine, just being the sacred feminine. And that is a lot of the yumminess that I've received from the mentorship and more. It's yes. Ah.
Thanks, Jess. And Marie, I would love to hear, what was it with the Sacred Birth Worker Mentorship that made you have that full body yes?
So I want to say, because as Sophia and Sophie and Jess were speaking, I thought the difference is when I applied for the mentorship, there wasn't even like a curriculum or something like that. So there wasn't a lot to look into. And I remember actually thinking this when I looked it up, and then I think I messaged you on Instagram. I was like, yeah, so, what exactly are we learning? And so, one part of me really wanted to know, okay, what exactly is she going to teach me? But then, like I already said, I was in this huge process of coming back to my body and really learning to trust my body again, which is easier said than done. And also teaching my body that she can trust me, that I listen to her. And so that was my main thing at that time. And I guess I was being very radical with that also, just out of need, because it had to be that. And so with all the alignments, me looking for courses and then couldn't find something, and then 3 days later you announced the mentorship, and I thought, oh, this is like aligned, but then, and also I knew you through the podcast, of course. Like I knew I had listened to every single episode in your podcast until then, and I really liked the way you talked about birth and the way you were debriefing with women. But I don't think that was the final thing that made me take the mentorship. It was really intuition. And I also remember, because you said, okay, let's do a discovery call. And I was like, oh, I don't really want to do a discovery call. But I felt really good in the call. Like I didn't feel, I don't know, I felt good with you. I felt good talking to you. And so waiting for the response, like I said before, in my body, and really trusting that. And I think it fits perfectly to how I came to birth and why I see birth as a teacher, because she teaches that, many other things too, but she also teaches that. And I just waited for the day that there was no doubt left, really, And you had these writings on your web. You didn't have a curriculum, but you wrote like, are you longing to serve women in their rite of passage, and all of these things. And it was so mysterious and sacred, even though you didn't call it the Sacred Birth Worker Mentorship, but it was mysterious and spiritual and connected. And I love when it is that. Is that an answer?
That is a beautiful answer. And yes, you are the one here from the first cohort. And it's true, the first cohort, I put out a vision and you felt my vision. You were that early adopter that went like, I trust her vision. I don't know what it is, but I trust her vision. And then I made the mentorship together with you and your cohort, really. There's the weeks before, sometimes the week before, I would do the content for it. And it took me 10 months, I think, to create what is today the 6-month kind of intensive online portal with information and all the practice and everything. So thank you for being an early adopter, which is, beautiful that. And I mean, even though now there's much more information on the website, for example, and there's so many testimonials and all these things, that is what I want women who are considering this mentorship to do, is to feel into the words and the vision, because that is what, if that speaks to you, it's right. Because at the end of the day, you can read through the curriculum and all the things we're going to do, but it's just a sentence. It's just a name of a lesson or something. It's like, tune into the vibration and you'll know. And all of you did that, like follow that intuition, that full body yes, listening to your body, truly. And I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that, Maria. I love that. You know, you're coming from that first cohort. Ah, beautiful. So I would like to round up now by asking from each and every one of you, you know, if someone is considering becoming a birth worker, maybe they're thinking about joining the next mentorship, maybe they're thinking about becoming a midwife, maybe an obstetrician. I don't think so, but maybe someone listening to this podcast is like, that medical model is for me. Um, or, you know, or just a birth worker in any capacity. You know, what would you say to that person if they're like thinking about it, they're not sure? What would be your suggestion? I'd love to hear from you, Jess, first, please. What advice would you give to someone who's sitting with it? Should I not? Is it for me?
One, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Where'd the whisper come from? That would be my first question. Like, where'd the whisper come from? How'd you feel when you got the whisper of, can I be a birth worker? Do I want to be serving women? And then I'd say, well, I mean, it just depends on the nature of the conversation too, or it's just like, I mean, everybody needs to learn about birth. They're like, everyone needs to learn about birth. And I like it's mentioned like it being in the conversation, whether you're just going to talk about it in conversation or if you genuinely want to serve, tune back into your whisper. Like, where did that come from? Go sit with self and like it's been said, like throughout this entire conversation, the vibration, like what does it feel like in you? And yeah. And yes, do it. And do it.
Yes, do it already. Thanks, Jess. Sophie, what would you say to someone who's considering this mentorship or just going down the birthwork route?
Well, I suppose anyone who's listening to this is like, wants to be all up in the natural birth thing. So if you're considering going into, the medical model, obstetric model, I'd like you to know that there is no such thing as changing the system from within as out of your own power, because you might start with that, and then once you're in the system, you will quickly learn that being tied to your license and being tied to being able to be sued, or that will absolutely influence your practice, and you will see very quickly that your priority will come to be your own safety over your calling. But if trying to get into the, really soul-felt, independent birth work, I truly believe that there's a shift in consciousness happening, a feminine awakening happening, a shift in the way we as women want to be in the world, the way we want to live, the way we want to birth, mother, and raise the new generation. And women birth the world and women birth the future. And if you feel the calling, then you've sensed that, and the women of your community are craving for you, and you can be part of, midwifing the birth of the new paradigm. And true belief that the revolution starts inside each of us. And, it's time, sister, bring your feminine gifts to the world.
Yes, I was like clapping here and cheering and so agreeing with you. And that's the thing, you know, it's just happening. Like stepping into birth work now, you can be a part of the new earth, great birth rebellion, as I kind of say. And I love that, Sophie. Thanks for that. And Sophia, what would you say to someone who's considering joining birth work?
I just want to echo everything that Sophie just said, because the revolution will not be televised, people. Um, it is within as without, and um, that is the only place that you can start, and then that will express itself out. And you got to sit with that. If that's where you want to be, if birth work is where you want to revolutionize, then you got to sit with that, and you got to know how that's going to affect you, your life, how your family, your community, and there's going to be challenges, there's going to be pushback, there's going to be difficulties, and there's going to be joy and depth and beauty and connection. And you might not be ready for all of it yet, but you got to know that you can meet it and that you can expand to it. And if that's where you want to be, then sit with it. Sit with it as much as you can. Talk to other birth workers who work in a way that you want to work, and birth workers maybe who don't work in a way that you want to work. So you can hear the other side. And feel it in your threads, in your heart, in your past, in your future.
Beautiful. Thanks so much, Sophia. And finally, Marie, do you want to share with us what you would say to someone thinking about becoming a birth worker?
Yeah. Well, I love everything that everyone said. I would say be aware this is not a weekend course. You know, it
Well, it
really
can be.
depends.
They can take a 3-day course online, right? Jess did that. You can. It's possible.
Yes, but what you are offering, Anna, is not a weekend course. So tune into what you want and where you want to be, and what do you feel drawn to? What are you lit up by? Like, even imagining, does it light you up or no, or what's happening? So it's not a weekend course. It's quite intense, the mentorship. And I love that about the mentorship. It really draws you in, and you can't, like, it's just present all the time, even when you don't read the book or watch the masterclass or whatever. It's just always there. At least that is how it felt for me. Constantly reflecting and processing what we were learning. And then I would say, like you said before, Anna, tune into the vibration. Like, read on Anna's website or on her Instagram, listen to the podcast, and the vibration of the words Anna's using. I feel that does a lot. Like I said before, to me it felt just so right, sacred, mysterious. That's what I love. So it feels perfect. And lately I have a lot of people saying to me, what you do is so inspiring. You are an inspiration. And I think what holds us back sometimes is when we feel like we do something that no one else around does. But I really feel that is where we can be an inspiration, and where we can step out and kind of, lead the way, but you know what I mean, in a feminine way, and be inspiring to others. And yeah, so tune in, feel your body, feel the vibration, trust yourself. I think. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Marie. And thank you so much, Jess, Sophie, and Sophia. It's been such an honor and pleasure to have you all on for this episode. The first time that I've invited several people on to have a chat. And I'm sure that what you shared has served women who are sitting with wanting to step into the birth portal as a space holder, whatever they choose, whether they choose to join us in the mentorship or not, maybe go another route. Thank you for taking the time to come and share your experiences of being a doula, a pediatrician, a midwife, and a sacred birth worker, straight in from being a birth nerd. And that's the thing, in the Sacred Birth Worker Mentorship, we have everyone, right? We have maidens and mothers. We've had women who have had a natural birth or a medicalized birth. We have women from all walks of life, all over the globe. And that is the beauty, that there's no prerequisite to step into this line of work. It is a soul calling. I think that's how we should leave this conversation today. It is a soul calling, and you don't have to have attended a birth. You know, if watching birth videos stir you to tears, you know, by listening to this podcast, that obviously you love listening to birth stories. That is a sign. That is a sign. Thank you, everyone, for stepping in and sharing your wisdom today. It's been an absolute honor, and I'm so proud that you're in my community. Yay! Thank you. Thank you for listening. If you love this podcast, then please consider sharing it, leave a review, or make a contribution on our Patreon page. And if you want to connect on social media, then find the podcast on Instagram as The Natural Birth Podcast. Thank you for listening.